Morning, everyone. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that this thing works. I've learned. I am a veteran. Okay, good. So, happy to be back. Always a pleasure to be on the stage here talking about the industrial market. I want to first start by thanking a couple folks from my office, Lindsay Junkins and Marina Termel, who helped me put these slides together. I could not do it without them. Thank you, guys. Let's talk a little bit about where I'm going to go here. We're going to go back and talk about 2016. I'll tell you some trends, some anecdotes, and talk about some big deals. We'll get into the current conditions. I once again produced the industrial market survey that is available downstairs, so we've got some updated statistics. And then, of course, I'll get into the forecast and we'll make some predictions. So for years now, I've been on this stage and I've talked about the industrial sector. And it's fair to say it's been as vibrant as any in Maine that we've seen. Industrial users are all thriving, businesses are growing, investors are taking notice, we're doing a lot of investment sales, prices are going up. Everything that we track suggests this really active and healthy market. And as I started preparing for this year, I got to thinking, is this really a healthy market? And I think clearly the answer is actually no. The pendulum has fully swung from 2011 and 10, 11, and 12 to what is now an extremely seller and landlord-friendly market. So it's good to be a landlord, but for everybody else, it's quite challenging. We're seeing vacancy rates at critically low numbers now. They've dropped for the 6th consecutive year. Lease pricing and sales prices continue to go up. And the reason I'm starting here and I'm highlighting this is that this space crunch, it needs to be addressed because it's starting to inhibit conventional and traditional industrial users. I'll talk about a few here. Messer Petroleum, that's a company, a client of mine that I spoke about last year on this stage. They were looking at some land. Jeff ended up buying a property. It was off market. We pivoted very quickly, but that whole process took 12 months. Agron Appliance is another great company, family owned. I've been working with Jason for 10 months to find a distribution center somewhere in Greater Portland. Not very picky. I've got a tour actually lined up next week, and we're looking at 2 buildings total. So if anybody has any ideas, please let me know. Bissell Brothers, we've all been to Bissell Brothers in Thompson's Point. They're doing extremely well there. Pete called me up. He wanted 3,000 square feet of storage space just for some cans and kegs. Really, really simple use. It took 3 months, and it took a little bit of luck. And I found him some space on Persumscott Street, but like I said, it's very inhibiting. There's a few other examples on here I won't get into. Connectivity Point, great company we all know. Green Kitchen Design, 207 Taxi. All of these folks are local, growing, and they want to grow, and are challenged by just the lack of inventory right now. Now, the message to them is when the opportunity comes, you jump. So you need to be patient, but you also have to be very aggressive when the opportunity does come up. I'll talk a little bit about craft brewing. It still remains active, although not as active in 16. In 15, 14, and 15, we saw a lot of new breweries come up. Here's an example of a few that have opened, and some are relocating and expanding. But I'm starting to see that honeymoon phase come to an end. They've gone from 16 or 15 in 2010, 11 registered craft breweries to over 80 today. So the competitiveness is starting to really come out, and they're starting to work against one another. And there's limited resources, of course, as well. So I started with some kind of challenging news. Let's get into some of the opportunities, the good news, the silver lining to all this. Finally, I think it's clear that new construction is on its way. I will highlight a few projects here that I think are some of the more interesting ones. 155 Rummery Road in South Portland. This was sold to a local developer, Dave McLeese, who it was a 50,000 square foot building, and he has plans, and he's actually already broken ground on an additional 25,000 square feet of new industrial style space. I talked to Roxanne Cole, his broker. She's reporting a lot of activity and interest. We've got some clients looking at it, so I think that'll be successful. We'll go into a few others here. In Gorham Industrial Park, Peter Holmes, who many of you know, he's a developer who built some buildings on Warren Avenue. He's proposing and has closed on a piece of land in Gorham to build a 25,000 square foot new industrial style building out in that market. Jen Small and Joe Malone are marketing that. And he's going to build, I think, 2,500 to 5,000 square foot units, and that's really the sweet spot. That's what we need right now in terms of inventory. 2401 Broadway. This is a really spectacular 9-acre lot in South Portland that just sold for over $1 million late last year, and the developer has plans to effectively build a new industrial park. Great idea. We haven't had one of those in many, many years, and it's zoned appropriately, phenomenal location, so I think, again, we'll be very successful. Danielle Lape will be marketing that property. There are build-to-suit opportunities on Pleasant Hill and Scarborough, in Saco as well, And 75 Walsh Drive is a property that was built on speculation in 2016. And my understanding is, in talking to Chris Craig, it should be fully leased within a week or two here. So the point is, now will all of these break ground and will all of them be built and will all of them be filled in 2017? Probably not. But it's fair to say that the conditions and the situation that we're in right now in terms of the market suggest that this is a perfect time to at least try these things. I do want to spend a little time talking about medicinal marijuana. We have to. I think it's fair to say that no industry has had as much of an impact on the industrial market than has medicinal marijuana. I wanted to try to quantify what I'm talking about as opposed to just telling you stories. I talked to some brokers that have really embraced this industry. Mark Fishman at Keller Williams, Brad Mull from my office. I looked at our own internal deals, and we're estimating between 300 and 350,000 square feet of industrial style space was leased statewide specific to this use. In terms of dollars, upwards of $15 to $20 million in sales, transaction, and leasing fees. So, big business right now we're speaking about. Clearly, landlords have become quite comfortable with the use. We as brokers and real estate experts and attorneys, et cetera, have become more adept and a better understanding as to looking for the red flags, understanding how to make these deals work for the landlords. And as a result, when I get new inventory, and anybody really, any broker that does, you need to ask some questions. Number one, are you comfortable with the use? Are you familiar with it? Do you understand the pros and cons? If yes, the second question is the property zoned appropriately? If yes, the third question is, does it have the proper infrastructure, especially electrical capacity? If the answer to those three questions is yes, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, your property value in terms of lease rate just went up significantly. There are, in fact, two price points in the market right now. Those for conventional, traditional users, still in the $5 or $6 a foot range, but if you can do medicinal marijuana, you're looking at closer to $8, $9, or $10 a foot. I'm fighting a little cold, I apologize. Now, of course, there are questions that are still out there and lingering. There's some insurance issues. There's certainly some legality questions. Financing is really tricky. If you think about it, as I mentioned, new construction is really popular right now, but the catch is that the banks are struggling, and most instances refusing to finance new construction with this use in place. So the conventional users that need space are maybe not able or willing to pay the pricing that you need for new construction. Those that are, this industry, banks won't finance. So we're really kind of stuck in a lot of cases. It's a really interesting issue. It's very topical. So MEREDA has taken it upon itself to host a breakfast on this event. So I encourage you to attend if you can. It'll be right here in this room. I'll be moderating a discussion with two very experienced attorneys, and we've also invited a caregiver and a grower. So it should be an interesting day. Talk a little bit about the investment market. Still very popular, of course. I will say that there were fewer sales in 16 than 15, but only because of lack of motivated sellers. We've got a lot of interest in demand, but there weren't a ton of sales. This was one of the largest deals of the year, One Baker's Way in Biddeford. The Bolus Company sold this for $12.5 million to a REIT out of Boston. Maine Today Media, this is their printing facility on Gannett Drive in South Portland. J.B. Brown purchased this as a sale leaseback. Press Herald, I understand, just invested heavily into their infrastructure there, so it makes sense for a sale leaseback there. Again, the Bolus Company did that at about $5 million. Chris Craig in my office sold 460 Riverside. This is about an 8.5% cap rate. This is a multi-tenanted building, 4 tenants, and it's sold for $1.7 million. In general, cap rates are stable. They're 8, 8.5%, 9%, depending on the quality. What's interesting is that investors are seemingly taking more risk now. We're seeing shorter-term leases. We're seeing lesser quality properties, perhaps, but in general, cap rates are stable. Talk about some of the larger deals of the year. This is a large lease that was just announced. L.L. Bean rented over 100,000 square feet at 12 Lexington. Tom Moulton represented L.L. Bean. Tom Dunham represented the landlord there. That's a great win for Lewiston. They're going to be stitching their boots right there. 30,000 square foot deal up in Winthrop. Tex Tech took 30,000 square feet there. Andrew LeBlanc in my office did that deal. We all know about the Portland Pirates leaving town. That was a shame, and sort of another unfortunate byproduct of that is that their practice facility and where the junior Pirates played in Saco was also vacated. And one of the luckiest calls, I think, of the entire year, the week we found out about that arena becoming available, Maine Junior Volleyball Company reached out to me looking for 30,000 square feet of athletic-style space, clear span, 30-foot ceiling heights. You know, any other week, forget about it, but literally that week, and needless to say, they jumped all over it, and they're in the process of converting that facility right now to volleyball and basketball. Pine Tree Industrial Park Road, Residex took 15,000 square feet. That park is entirely full. Greg Bolus represented that tenant. Greg Hastings represented the landlord. Here's a few sales. I'm going to fly through these just in the interest of time. J.B. Brown purchased 102 Hutchins Drive on speculation for $4 million. There's a tenant in place under contract to hopefully take that entire property. Casco Bay Steel purchased 1156 Broadway for $3 million. Mark Malone represented the seller there. Tom Dunham represented Casco Bay Steel. 212 Canco, this is where the city of Portland is going to put their Parks and Rec department and a number of other departments, is my understanding. They're sort of phasing out of West Bayside. They're going to be putting that land on the market for sale as a redevelopment. My company arranged that sale. And one of the nicer buildings that we sold this year, maybe ever, is 34 Spring Hill. And this is in Saco. This is the former Franklin Fuels facility. It was sold to an investor, but it was triggered really by a user, Saco River Dye House. They are going to put their, they have put their dye house in that facility, and it's a gorgeous building, $2.1 million. 18 Morin Street in Biddeford, or I'm sorry, 155. That's the Rummery Road deal that Roxanne Cole put together, $1.5 million. You can kind of see in the lower left corner there, that pad, that's an existing foundation, and that's where Dave is going to build that 25,000 square foot spec building. 18 Morin Street is a property in Biddeford that's sold for only $25 a foot. So you can see there's still some real value to be had in Biddeford. John Robinson represented the seller there, and Greg Hastings represented the buyer. 184 Main Street, this is the building that Jeff Messer and Messer Petroleum ended up purchasing, $1.2 million. Brad Moll represented the seller, and I represented Jeff. And I got to talk about this building very quickly. You want to talk about an indication of how hot Bayside is. Not that that $810,000 number is all that high, but on a per square foot basis, that's almost $200 a foot. So Brian Milliken, who owned that building, listened to the market, leased some space off of that area. And not that the buyer overpaid. During the due diligence process, he actually was able to secure a long-term lease with McGaley & Ruggs, and they are now the tenant in that building. So it's a really showcase property for them. They can show off their product, and it's just a very, very hot neighborhood. The brokers involved in all of those deals, there was like 3 deals and 3 different tenants in that process. John Robinson, Mark Malone, Brad Moll again, and myself. Nationally, very similar story. Tight inventory across the board. Cannabis, where legal, is impacting every state. The big difference between the nation and what we're seeing here is really e-commerce. Folks like Amazon, they're building these new incredible facilities all over the country, and we haven't seen that yet here in Maine. So where are we here in Maine? Here's some of the stats. 557 buildings inventoried, and that 2.32% vacancy rate is not a typo. That's the number. That was the number in December. I can say with some level of assurance that it's lower than that today in only 30 days. Vacancy rate by town, you can see it's pretty tight across the board. I'm going to just breeze through these. Vacancy rate by parks. More than half of the parks that I track now are 100% full. You drive through these huge, huge industrial parks. There's no for lease signs. There's no for sale signs. It's really incredible. Leasing is a little tricky. I'll admit that this slide is a little compromised only because I'm starting to run out of data points. I don't have a lot of asking lease rates. So the point I want to make today is if you have a new listing or if you have an opportunity to put space in the market, really think about it. Talk to a couple professionals and probably push the price. There's really no reason not to at this point. This chart shows the stunning drop in vacancy rates. You can see it very clearly. I put cap rates on there, not that they directly correlate, but both just show an increasingly competitive and tight market, and I don't see that changing at all. This chart shows price trajectory, and what really jumped out to me is the sale price. If you think about it, in 2011, what sales we did have, and they weren't many, were $40, $45 a square foot. Today, at a minimum, we're looking at $50 to $55 a square foot. In some cases, for smaller owner-user buildings, if they're quality, we've seen $70, $80 a foot deals, and they're appraising. So pricing has really, really jumped in the last few years. So I'll get into my forecast. I always like to talk about some vacancies. I'm running low on time, so I'll just breeze through there. I will say, here's my first prediction, that all 6 of these within the first 2 quarters of this year will be fully leased. Secondary markets, I didn't get a chance to talk much about Lewiston, Auburn, or Southern York County, the Mid-Coast. All are doing very well. All have really capitalized on Greater Portland's tight inventory, and I don't expect that to change in 2017. I do think that of those projects I showed, and there are several others, we'll see at least 200,000 square feet of new inventory. And not owner-user businesses growing their own buildings. I'm talking about empty buildings, either on spec or with tenants in mind. And that's really what we need. I do think the asking average lease rate will top $6 a square foot. That's kind of the new norm in the industrial market. That's our base. I think that cannabis cultivation, these growing facilities, will slow down, largely due to municipalities in the state and the regulators kind of, bringing the rope in a little bit. And that may be a good thing. So I think those that are already established and have real estate are going to do quite well and continue to thrive. But the barrier to entry to get into that market is going to be that much higher in 2017. New construction for owner users, I think, is going to become really appealing. Like I mentioned, the Agrons of the world, or the Jeff Messers. As the price per square foot for existing inventory goes up, the cost of construction hasn't really skyrocketed, so the gap is getting smaller and smaller, and financing is really strong for owner users, so I think that's going to be a real popular theme in 2017. Manufacturing and maker space, I think the whole manufacturing industry is doing a good job of spinning and almost like a PR push to get younger people rethinking these jobs. They're not just line jobs. They're trying to make it more makerspace. You're using your hands, you're using your minds, you're getting creative. And as a result, I think they'll be successful and demand will increase. E-commerce, like I said, really, really popular throughout the country. Maybe this is wishful thinking. I'd love to see it break into the Maine market. Let's just say I hope that happens. And then alternative energy. You talk to any industrial user, they have three big issues with doing business in Maine. Labor force, as our keynote spoke about, logistics, just geographically, and then finally energy costs. The biggest opportunity, in my opinion, for industrial users are the big sizes of those roofs. In Massachusetts, in New York, and elsewhere, we're seeing solar panels become very, very popular. They're heavily incentivized to do so, and we're not seeing quite as much of that as in Maine yet, but I think that's going to change. So either in this year or in the next year, talk to your roof guy. Mike Davis is here from IRC, Revision Energy. There's really going to be some good opportunities to save some money on energy. That's all I have. One last prediction, Patriots 35, Steelers 17.